The unexpected guest. A hush fell over the great hall as they entered. The Phoenician lords were amazed. Who on earth could this stranger be, and what was he doing with Nausicaa? Ignoring their stares, the princess led Odysseus past the long banqueting table to the far end of the hall, where her father and mother sat before the fire. Nausicaa explained how she had found him, and repeated the story of his shipwreck and his longing to return home. When she had finished, the king remained silent. It was Nausicaa's mother, silver-haired Arete, who spoke. You are welcome in Phoenicia, dear stranger, and we are only sorry that it's misfortune that has brought you here. We'll do all we can to help you return to your home and your family. But now I'm curious to know who you are and where you come from. It isn't every day that an unexpected guest comes to Phoenicia. Wise Arete, your words are most gracious, replied Odysseus, still kneeling in the ashes of the hearth. I hope you'll understand if I don't answer your questions now. Since shipwreck has brought me to your beautiful land with nothing but my life, I can offer nothing but words as proof of who I am. When I tell you, you'll be astonished. At first you may not believe me, although as my story unfolds you realize that I know too much to have made it up. But my story is long, as my suffering has been great, and I am too weary to tell you now. Of course, put in King Alcinous, before his wife could reply. We must let you rest before we ask you to do any explaining. And it's not right, he continued, getting up from his seat by the fire, that you should kneel there in the ashes while we all stare at your open mouth, as if you were a creature from another world. It doesn't matter whether you're the poorest beggar or one of the great gods in disguise. You're our guest, and hospitality demands that we should make all guests feel at home. With these words the king helped Odysseus to his feet, and led him to the center of the great banqueting table, where his favorite son, Laodameus, was sitting. Laodameus got up at once and gracefully offered the stranger his seat. Now eat and drink your fill, said Alcinous. Afterward, my daughter's maids will show you to your bed. Tomorrow we'll entertain you and arrange your journey home. Later that night, alone on his bed, Odysseus prayed once more to his guardian goddess, Athena. Surely now he was as good as home. When Alcinous came to rouse him, his unknown guest, the following dawn, he found him already dressed, gazing at the reddening sky. He was trying to imagine the same sun rising over Ithaca. The king brought good news. A ship was being prepared to carry Odysseus home, and a crew of 52 of Phoenicia's finest young oarsmen had volunteered to take him. They would be ready to sail that evening. Odysseus was overjoyed. Meanwhile, there was to be the entertainment that Alcinous had promised. After a quick breakfast of bread and wine, the king led his guests to the assembly place in front of the palace. Here the best runners and fighters in Phoenicia had gathered to show off their athletic skills. Odysseus could only think of the journey home and nothing else. Nevertheless, out of consideration for their hosts, he pretended to enjoy the spectacle and applauded each of the winners with apparent enthusiasm. When the games were over, Prince Laodameus, the champion boxer, came up to him and invited him to challenge one of the winners in whichever event he pleased. Dear Prince, replied Odysseus, you will have to forgive me, for I have no heart for the games today. No, of course not. I understand. And I certainly understand, dear stranger, sneered Euryalus, the champion discus thrower, who in the form of beauty looked like Ares, son of the great Zeus and the god of war. You're not in the mood for games because you're scared of making a fool of yourself. I bet the only games that you're any good at are the ones you make money from. You might have the body of an athlete, but you have the heart of a merchant. You probably never threw a discus or strung a bow in your life, yet here you are mysteriously posing as someone noble and important. White with anger, Odysseus rose from his seat. Foolish, insolent boy! I see whoever made you forget to give I see whoever made you forget to give you brains, and whoever brought you up forgot to teach you your manners. I long for my home, and my mind is filled with many years of sorrow. How could I think of playing games? The tiniest drop of wisdom would have told you that. But since you insulted me with such ill-chosen words, I shall teach you a lesson. And without bothering to remove his cloak, Odysseus picked up a discus that was larger and heavier than any Phoenicius had used. He spun around expertly on his feet to gain momentum and let it go. He was still weak and stiff after the ordeal at sea, but the goddess Athena was watching over him and gave him renewed strength. The discus flew far beyond the earlier throws. Gasps of amazement traveled around the assembly place, followed by murmurs of admiration. There were no other challenges. As they made their way back to the palace, where a huge feast had been prepared, the Phoenicians looked at their unknown guest with even greater interest than before. Now their interest was mingled with deep respect. More than ever, they wondered who their visitor could be. Alcinous promised that Odysseus would be entertained, and he was good as his word. 12 sheep, 8 wild boar, and 2 oxen had been slaughtered, dressed, and roasted. Huge jugs of the best Phoenician wine had been brought up from the cellar. When his guests were all seated and served, Alcinous had his favorite bard, Demodocus, brought out to sing to them. Watching the frail, blind old man lead him to the seat in the middle of the hall, Odysseus found it hard to believe that he could still perform. Surely his ancient voice would sound cracked and feeble? And now could those arthritic fingers pluck the strings of the lyre? Yet, as soon as Demodocus sounded the first notes and opened his mouth to sing, the Ithacan knew that he was listening to the music of the gods. Although he had no appetite for the feast, sick as he was with longing for home, Odysseus entirely forgot himself in the Olympian music. Demodocus sang first of the love of Ares, god of war, and Aphrodite, goddess of love, and of anger and revenge of Aphrodite's husband, Hephaestus, god of fire and forge. The song was both funny and moving, and when it was over, Odysseus led the applause. Then Demodocus began a second song, this time a song of the Trojan War, about the famous fight between Odysseus and Achilles. It was painful for Odysseus to even think of those years of war and his lost comrades. As he listened to the lovely melancholic song, he was overcome and covered his face with his hands to hide his tears. Alcinous saw his mysterious guest's distress, and a question stirred in his mind. However, he said nothing, and when Demodocus had finished, the applause had died away, he ordered the dancers to take the floor. To the rhythm of the drums and chants, while the blind Demodocus plucked his lyre, the young men and women of Phoenicia, led by Nausicaa and Laodameus, swayed, leaped, and spun before him. Roused for his misery, Odysseus was dazzled by the display, and he lost no time in praising the dancers. The king was delighted. Listen, my friends, to how well our mysterious guest had appreciated our music and our dancing. Now, before we ask him to tell us his story, let's shower him with gifts, so that wherever he goes, he'll speak well of Phoenicia. And you, Euryalus, should be the first to come forward. Without hesitation, Euryalus rose from his place and turned to Odysseus. He unbuckled his sword and held it out in both hands. Dear stranger, please accept this token and forgive my foolish insults. I beg you to remember the giver of the gift, and not the arrogant young fool who abused you. Treasure the sword well. It's made of fine bronze, and the hilt of his pure silver. You can see its beauty for yourself. Odysseus took the sword and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Euryalus, you've been apologized most gracefully. I'll remember you as you wish, and may the gods bless your life. After Euryalus and the 12 Phoenician princes of rank brought their gifts forward, and Odysseus was soon surrounded by treasures. He was delighted. Having lost all the riches that he had plundered from Troy, at least he would not now be returning home empty-handed. When his gifts had been stowed away, and in a vast chest he carried off the ship, Odysseus poured out a glass of the best wine and carried it to Demodocus. Silence fell as he knelt before the withered old man. Demodocus, I offer you this as a sign of my admiration. All poets and musicians deserve our praise, because they sing of human suffering and joy. Explain to ourselves, and teach us to understand the world. He handed the glass to the blind old man, who took it in a shaking hand. I must ask you one last favor, said Odysseus. Earlier you sang of the fight between the great Achaean lords, Odysseus and Achilles. I would like you to sing of the Achaeans once more, but of a later theme. Sing to us now of the wooden horse that enabled the Greeks at last, after 10 long, weary years, to enter Troy and destroy it. Demodocus beamed with pleasure as Odysseus praised him. Now he raised his glass towards the Ithacan's voice, and drained it with the vigor of a young man. He then set down the glass, plucked out his lyre, and began to sing.